Hello, today I'm going to talk about Humanitarian Wikimedia, a concept that is inspired by the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap and that tries to inspire collaboration on the Wikimedia project around disasters. This is coordinated by the Wikimedians for disaster response, and you can find the slides on this Zenodo address. The talk is structured as follows. It has 5 parts here shown in italics that are rather short, and then a more detailed tour, and then hopefully some discussion. So the short parts are: there's an overview of what Wikimedia projects are, and about the types of materials that they cover that have a relationship to disasters. Then there are 2 visualizations that are proposed ways to explore the world of disasters by geography and type of disaster, and here by timeline of wars. Then the main tour will be around all the different Wikimedia projects and some disaster-related materials in them. Finally, we will take a look at existing interactions between Wikimedia and OSM, and then hopefully there will be some discussion. So, the Wikimedia projects, they're roughly organized by information channel. So, Wikipedia is the encyclopedia, and Wikibooks is for books, and so on. And I've arranged them here, or I've reused an arrangement where they are basically all complete. And this is clockwise. Let's start at Wikipedia and then go from there. So Wikipedia exists in 325 languages, it's the encyclopedia. And we have Wikimania for the annual gathering, Wikibooks, 120 languages for books. Meta is for discussions that concern more than one of those wikis. And so it's just one wiki, but can handle multiple languages. WikiQuote exists in 89 languages, it's for quotes. Wikispecies for biological species. MediaWiki is the software that runs all of these. Incubator is for breeding new projects that might eventually end up in one of them or as one of the new ones. Wikidata is a database that anyone can edit. Also multilingual, all these platforms here. Wikivoyage exists in 24 languages, a travel guide, Wikiversity, and learning environment in 17 languages. Wiktionary, a dictionary, an electronic dictionary in 183 languages. Wikinews, a news site in 34 languages. Wikisource, a text archive in 74 languages. And Wikimedia Commons, which is a media repository. In the middle here you have the Wikimedia logo, which can stand either for the Wikimedia Foundation or Wikimedia affiliates or the Wikimedia community more broadly. Altogether, this makes up 1,000 wikis roughly. So each of these has their own information channel, and the disaster-related matters then follow the kind of information available through that channel. So in Wikipedia you might have articles about disasters, about disaster types, about the effects that the disasters have on disaster mitigation and management measures, on disaster preparedness, and so on. On Wikimania you might have events that discuss all of this, or there might be a mapathon, or because some OSMers are present. Then in Wikibooks you can find books and so on. And the Wikimedia community is organizing the content here and is coordinating, and for this there is a community group called the Wikimedians for Disaster Response. Now, here is one example of visualization of disaster-related data from Wikidata. It shows disasters that are known to Wikidata on a map by geolocation and also by disaster type. So quite prominently visible are the earthquakes here. And depending on which disasters you're interested in or which regions you're interested in, you can then explore this map. Basically, you click on any of the individual dots or click away any of those kinds of disasters here. And this works in a self-guided manner, and so I would just like to recommend it to you, but I'll not go deeper. In a similar fashion, this timeline here of wars that humanity has engaged in can be explored in a self-guided fashion and you just need to follow the link and then zoom into this visualization and click your way through to the images or Wikipedia articles around those particular wars. What is less easy to do in a self-guided fashion is figure out where the disaster-related content sits in all these different projects and what kinds of materials these might be. And so this is the tool we're now going to do together. We will start at the top, this time with Wikimania, and still go clockwise. So Wikimania itself was affected by the disaster like many other events, and so it was cancelled last year, then turned into a virtual event in 2021. At Wikimanias, you often also have some disaster-related activities. So for instance, here is a disaster response meetup from 2018. And then at that meetup, activities were also discussed, like curating the information on the by the way of some maps of the kind you just saw. Then here there was an editathon to commemorate a major earthquake in Mexico, or here a humanitarian OpenStreetMap event organized by Wikimedia in Indonesia. In Wikibooks you find materials related to the COVID-19 pandemic, to earthquakes in Thai, and here also in English how to or what measures to take when an earthquake occurs. On Meta you have all sorts of things that concern more than one of those wikis, including, for instance, a discussion of changes to the Wikipedia app that also uses some examples involving an earthquake or a cyclone. And there's also some coordination around preserving cultural heritage. So here we have an example of a cultural heritage site in Nepal that was affected by the 2015 earthquakes. And of course, COVID is also on Meta. Wikiquote has collections of quotes related to indicated like keywords. So Polish word for disaster, so you get Polish disaster-related quotes. English ones for storm or disease X, which is a term that the World Health Organization has coined in order to describe emerging diseases, basically that are due to an unknown pathogen like the SARS-CoV-2 virus was when this pandemic started. In Wikispecies you have information about species like this virus, for instance, but also about some interactions that the species or their specimens might have had with a disaster. So for instance, for this species here, the actual specimen, the original specimen, was lost in the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. MediaWiki is the software that runs all of these wikis, and also the OpenStreetMap wiki. And there is a community of developers. They normally have regular meetups, and they have all gone virtual in the last almost 2 years now. The incubator, which breeds things that go into this ecosystem eventually, also has some articles, for instance, an earthquake in August, or here is, and this is in Ladino, which doesn't have its Wikipedia yet, and here is Igbo about a hurricane. And then here Wikidata, the database that anyone can edit, another hurricane and with the information exposed in Spanish, and the wildfire with information exposed in English. A number of visualizations related to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the COVID-19 disease, and then the COVID-19 pandemic, and different entities that relate to these. And then here certain visualizations of the scholarly literature about COVID-19, and this is coordinated by Wikiproject COVID-19. Then on Wikivoyage, the Chinese version, for instance, has an entry about a tsunami and how this affects travel. or what precautions to take, or which areas are most affected, these kind of things. On the German Wikivoyage, you can find, for example, information about Chelyabinsk and the meteorite that came down nearby in 2013, and they provide you with information about the museum in which you can see some of the pieces that have been recovered from the meteorite. And here is the Turkish Wikivoyage with more information about the pandemic. Wikiversity also has entries about the pandemic here in Arabic, and here is a German entry on disaster management, which for instance has a classification of disasters like floods or droughts, or the disappearance of large bodies of water. Then Wiktionary, for instance, the entries for nuclear accident in Dutch, or for tsunami in Spanish, or for ship sinking in Breton. Then Wikinews with articles about follow-ups to the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, or about a tornado in the United States, or here in Dutch, or here in Czech about the fire of the National Museum in Brazil. This is again a case of cultural heritage, where the Wikimedia community has tried to help a lot with collecting, categorizing, curating information related to the museum's materials, and to those, especially to those that have been lost. In Wikisource, we can find things like newspaper entries from 1907 about an earthquake, or from 1843 about an earthquake in Guadeloupe, and also policy documents that relate to the pandemic, for instance. On Wikimedia Commons, we can find cartoons of various sorts here in Bengali and in Swahili to explain hygienic measures to take during the pandemic. Here is a tsunami in Lisbon, a historic depiction. Here's a tsunami stone from Japan, an earthquake museum, and then just all sorts of signs, including signs that tell people to give way to first responders. Last but not least in our tour here, we're now back at Wikipedia. Bengali Wikipedia with an entry about tornadoes, and Arabic Wikipedia with crisis mapping. And then I've chosen two wiki projects from the English Wikipedia as examples of how people coordinate. So here's Wiki Project Medicine, which has a translation task force that covered the Ebola pandemic in West and Central Africa. And it did so by basically improving the English article, then especially the introductory part, then translating that introductory part in the languages of the people who were actually affected with the disease. And Wiki Project Disaster Management does not only deal with individual disasters, but also with the theoretical background information, like what kinds of disasters there are, how you can mitigate them, how you can prepare, how one can respond and recover, what kind of hazards are there, and then also entries about individual disasters. There are other contexts in which Wikimedians interact with disasters. So, for instance, they document cases where humanitarian help has occurred. Here, Australia has donated a fire truck to Samoa after a disaster. Here is a documentation of the countries that have provided humanitarian support to Japan after the 2011 earthquake. This information is compiled on Wikimedia Commons based on lots of different sources. But Wikimedia projects are also big reusers of existing information. So here's an image taken out of a scholarly article that describes how humanitarian mapping has evolved in OpenStreetMap. including with the emergence of different organizations like the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. Then the community is concerned a lot with references, and that especially reliable references that can be used to support all the information across the Wikimedia ecosystem. And it also has various mechanisms to identify misinformation, fake news, and yeah, tries to avoid them, or at least highlight them as what they are. Here is a tool that we call Internet in a Box, which is a Raspberry Pi that has a snapshot of Wikipedia and also of OpenStreetMap. And if you provide it with electricity, it can serve as a local Wi-Fi hotspot that does not need connection to the broader internet. And then, yeah, also just the bug tracker of Wikipedia has a channel for things that are related to the pandemic. Now the tour is finished. I would just like to outline some interactions that already exist between Wikimedia and the OpenStreetMap system. So for instance, here you have a Wikidata query for tasks in the OpenHotOSM tasking manager. And it does the same as before. It looks for the geolocation and for the classification of those things for which the tasks exist. You see this is very incomplete, but at least it gives some early indication. And then more complete is the information on Wikimedia Commons about OpenStreetMap related things. So for instance, you see here 21 categories of OpenStreetMap maps and so on. And then here there is an initiative on the OpenStreetMap wiki, the Wikipedia Link Improvement Project, which tries to improve the interlinking between Wikimedia projects on the one hand and OpenStreetMap on the other hand, especially Wikipedia and Wikidata. And this makes use of queries to the Wikidata query service and to a related service called Sophox that can also query OSM and supports automation. But since it does support automation, it comes with a big red warning here, because if you just jump into it and make use of the automation without knowing the details of what you're editing, then this can become a problem in terms of data quality on either the OSM or on the Wikimedia end. Another interaction here is that at this very Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Summit 2021, there is another session involving Wikimedia prominently. It is by Dennis Raylin Chen, scheduled about 12 hours earlier than this one. And it is about collaboration of the Taiwan government with OpenStreetMap and Wikidata. And the collaboration was around river data from Taiwan. With that, I would like to thank the communities that were involved in curating the information that I've presented, and also individuals. And I would like to point you to two references that allow you to dig deeper. We have a paper about COVID-19 information in Wikidata and in Wikipedia. And yeah, the slides are here, and here's some contact information. Now I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.